Hey everyone, Justin here. This video we're going to go over calibrations. It's probably going to be quite a longer video, so if you need to skip ahead to whichever controller or program is relevant to you, I will provide links in the description below. Once again, let's start off with WiinUSoft. WiinUSoft, we have our calibrations and our properties windows for each controller, and they all come with the default calibration regardless of the controller type. And then we have minimum, moderate, extra, and custom. Minimum means smaller dead zones, while moderate is larger dead zones than the default and shorter ranges, and extra is even larger dead zones and shorter ranges. So if you're finding that default isn't quite behaving properly, try using one of these other calibrations. In order to use the custom calibration, we first need to connect our controller. With our controller connected, let's go to Properties, drop down to Calibrations, and choose Custom. And then this window will open with instructions here. So for the WiinUPro controller, you just leave the joysticks, click Next. What this does is it sets the center of each axis. So you see if I actually move the joystick here, it changes them. So just leave them centered, click Next. You can then adjust the center afterwards if you feel like it needs to be adjusted. Then it has the minimum and maximums that are being set right now. And all you have to do to set those is move the joysticks around in full circles, and it will automatically detect the minimum and the maximum of each of these ranges. If you find that after doing this, the controller doesn't quite feel like it's getting its maximum, say like if instead of running in a game you're still walking, you can lower the maximums and raise the minimums in order to adjust for that range to make sure you're getting 100% outputted. And then this last part sets the dead zones. In order to do this, it says to, without putting too much pressure on the joystick, just to kind of rub the outside of the joystick to move around without actually triggering in any single direction is the goal here. So you kind of just put it on the controller and wiggle it around. Another way, if you were to move the controller around itself to try and activate those dead zone areas. And you can see I accidentally hit a direction in one of mine, so the dead zone jumped really high. But these are text boxes, so you can just edit those and change them to something similar or to what the others are as well. And if you want to slightly increase those dead zones, if you like larger ones, you can do that. And once you click Done, it will save that calibration and it will be active. Now let's take a look at how it does the calibrations for our Wii remotes. So let's disconnect this one and connect this one. Okay, with our Wii remote connected, we can choose our properties. Actually, if I click Save, it will apply that new name of Wiimote. Oops, wrong one. And then Calibrations, drop down to Custom. And you can see it says place the Wiimote on a flat surface, face down, and click Next. Now this is calibrating the accelerometers. So let's click Next, and then it sets the center of the x-axis, and then it has you to rotate the Wiimote so that the buttons are facing to the left and right. This will set the minimum and maximum rotation. If you want to not to have to rotate your Wiimote so as much, if you don't want to have to do quite that to activate 100%, you can use these values to as a guideline to how far or less you want to rotate it from the center. So when I click Next, I'll be able to edit these as well. So if I don't want to have to rotate so drastically, I can say change that to 60 and lower this to, I don't know, 124. No, that should be higher than the center. Let's do I don't know, say 148, and that should mean that in order to get 100% trigger on it, I should only have to rotate it slightly instead of all the way. And there's also a dead zone, so when you're holding it, you don't have to precisely hold it center. There's no way to really set that automatically, so you're going to want to choose something. And then for the y-axis, it says return the Wiimote to the face down position and choose next. And then again now we're setting the minimum and the maximum. Now you have it stand up on top on the sensor and portion, and then on the bottom for the extension, and that will give you your minimum and maximums. Again, if you don't want to rotate it so much, you can adjust these numbers up and down, and as well as set a dead zone so that you don't accidentally trigger, if you're emulating an axis, you don't accidentally trigger that axis just by holding it normally. Now for the z-axis, this basically determines if the Wiimote is face up or face down. So you start by standing it on its extension port, choose next, and then you just have it face up and face down. That will give you the minimums and maximums. Again, you can adjust those, but you probably don't want to use the z-axis as a delimiter or as an input version. And then you can also have the ability to set the IR pointer bounding box. Now this is on a scale from 0 to 1023, so 512 is the center of the screen. So when you're pointing directly in the middle of the sensor bar, aimed up a little bit, and then the width of the box is the dead zone of the box. So it's not until you go outside of these areas where you will start to trigger the direction that you have set to the IR pointer. And obviously this only applies if you've actually assigned the IR pointer to something. And so you don't have to worry about this if you're not going to if you don't plan on using that. Now at this point our Wii remote is done being calibrated, but we also need to calibrate extensions if we plan on using them. We can skip through extensions, and we can click done here if we're just planning on using our Wii remote. But if we're planning on using our Nunchuk, then we just plug in our Nunchuk. And then it brings up the next calibration. And it says just hold the right side of the Nunchuk up with the top stick parallel to the ground. So, parallel, not perpendicular. Yes, that would just be like this. And you just try to hold it wherever it's comfortable, and this will be considered the center for the x-axis. Click next, and you rotate it left and right to their desired angles. Here you can also, if you don't want to turn so drastically, just turn it to where you want it to have those be set as the minimum and the maximum. And it gives us a default dead zone of 16, which is usually pretty good, but if you want a different dead zone, you can edit that as well. Now return the Nunchuk to face up position, again with the joystick parallel to the ground, and just hold still to click next for it to the center, then tilt it up and down to set those minimums and maximums. I suggest not going all the way down to, otherwise it'll put quite a bit of strain and risk depending on how you're using your controller. And then again we can change the dead zones and minimums and maximums afterwards. Now for the z-axis, you rotate it this way so that the joystick is perpendicular to the ground. Choose next to have the center, and then put it face up and then face down in order to set the minimum and maximums for those areas. Again, you're not really going to be using the z-axis as an assignment type, but that's more for like determining when you're shaking the controller in a certain direction. Now that calibration is complete. For the Nunchuk, there's a part 2 to use the joystick. So again, this is similar. You just leave it untouched to get the centers, then you rotate it around to get the minimums and maximums, and then you can change those, wheel it around a little bit to get the dead zone, and then you can also manually set the dead zones. That's it for the Nunchuk. If you only plan on using Wiimote and Nunchuk, then you can click done. Otherwise, you can also move on to the Classic Controller and Classic Controller Pro. Actually, I'm going to use a Classic Controller since the Classic Controller has analog triggers to it. That's another thing to calibrate. Otherwise, they're pretty much identical. So in this case, you leave joysticks alone, choose next, then you move them around in full circles to get the minimums and maximums. Choose next, and then you can wiggle them around to find the dead zones. Oh, I think I forgot one. Yeah, I forgot to do the triggers. When you're moving the joysticks around, you also put the triggers all the way down so that they're pressed, and that will give you minimums and maximums for these as well. So in my case, I would actually have to restart because I don't think you can. Oh yes, you can. If you need to, I actually haven't tested that. So if you need to recalibrate something, just unplug it and plug it back in. Of course, for the Wiimote, you'd have to start over again. But it always starts with the Wiimote first. So you choose next, then move the joysticks around in full circles and press L and R until they click. Then choose next. You can try to figure out what the dead zones are, and then you can adjust those as well. And then after that, you can choose done, or you can calibrate the Classic Controller Pro if you want. The benefit of doing all of these at once is that you can save this calibration, and actually this calibration will be saved automatically. So as the custom, so every time the controller is detected, which is based on the Wii remote, it will load all those calibrations. So one day you might be playing with Wiimote and Nunchuk and it'll be calibrated. You switch to a different game that uses the classic controller, and the classic controller will already be calibrated. So it groups all those together. So it's good to do all those at once if you can. And then you would just click save to apply that. Now let's take a look at how calibrations are done in WiinUPro, and we'll start with our Switch Pro controller. So we'll connect the controller, and then we'll click on the joystick and choose calibrate. And as you can see, we get a lot more flexibility in WiinUPro, and you get more control over everything. So this is what it looks like when you move the controller around. The Switch Pro controller should actually be calibrated pretty well since it's interfacing through Windows, which already has calibration. So if you set the calibration in joy.cpl, the Pro controller, properties, and then settings, and do a calibrate here, all those settings will be reflected in here as well. So actually, if you do that, you shouldn't have to calibrate your Switch Pro controller at all unless you want excess dead zones or anti-dead zones or something like that. So in that case, let me change my mind and go to our WiiUPro controller. And these are pretty much the same across any controller with joysticks. All joysticks are handled the same way. So if I just click on joystick and choose calibrate, it brings that window up again. And in this window, as I move my joystick around, you can see a couple things moving here. This little red dot is the first thing I want to bring your attention to. That is the raw input that's being read from the controller. So right now, as we're reading the controller and applying what we are expecting it to output, you can see that it's down right for my controller. So as I move this around, that little red dot will move around in each direction that I pull it towards. Now this green circle here is what's being emulated to the game. So right now it's completely center at 0, 0, which is also shown down here for your convenience. And as I move it, you can see it goes to actually past 100% or negative 100%, depending which direction it's actually going in. But you can see where that green dot lies of what's being emulated. So this dark gray area here is the dead zone. So as I keep my red dot in here inside, you can see that the green circle does not move at all because it's within the dead zone region. Dead zone region, of course, can be changed in the area labeled dead zone, and each direction is independently changed of one another. Currently, it's set up as a square dead zone. I had some issues with the circular, so once I revisit that area and improve it, I'll probably be going back to circular later. And we also have this large gray area, which represents the limits. So right now, if everything's limited at or left at the default limit, when we go all the way to right, we actually hit 107% instead of 100%, which isn't too bad. But the negative 126% of the y-axis is pretty off. That means you're going to be hitting 100% before your joystick is all the way pressed down, which may not be a trouble to some people, but if you're trying to play, I don't know, a stealth game and going really slow, applying a little bit input is actually going to give you more than what you want. So if I decrease this the negative y-axis, you can see that it brings the light gray area in. So let me show you as I hold it down here. Oh wait, I don't want it in, I want it out. Well, as you can see, if I bring it in, it actually lowers the range and brings that green dot further out. While we can see this being visible here, I just want to point out this yellow line here is the 100% region. So when that green dot is on here, that means that's where 100% is. So let's bring the limit out, which brings the green circle closer to our 100% line. So you can see now it's at negative 103% when we go to the y-axis, going down. It doesn't affect the other areas as well, but we can change that, of course, if we like. So I think the goal is usually just to have it not be so drastic. If you put it right on 100%, you might have issues when you get to the sides here with it being before the line, and you don't want that either. Another feature that this has is the anti-dead zone, which means that you apply a minimum percentage to emulate using or once you get outside the dead zone area. So let's say I want to at minimum apply 30% range. So it's going to go from 30% to 100% when I'm going down. So as soon as my red dot, which is the raw input, gets outside of that dead zone, the green circle jumps straight to 30%. And as you can read down where the y-axis here, it has negative 30% when I'm right outside the dead zone. Then as I increase, the green dot is going to go from that blue line to this yellow one. So which is essentially the same as the red dot going from outside the gray zone, outside the dead zone to the gray limit zone. So now my range is effectively from negative 30% to negative 102% when I'm emulating it to a game. Now the reason that this is included is because some games have dead zones built into them, and if you already have your dead zone set up perfectly the way you want, you may be pushing slightly. Again, let's say another stealth game. You may be trying to push slightly to sneak ever so slightly, but it's not picking up your input because of the game's built-in dead zone. So this will counteract that, and this will take some adjusting if your game does have that and you do want to counter it, to find out where that dead zone is so that you can get more precision control. And the last area in here is the center. And the center is just where that red dot starts out. So also to note, these are all based on percentage. The anti-dead zone is a percent, the dead zone is a percent, the limit is a percent. The center is raw data, so this will be different for each joystick type. And you might see little to no change as you hit just like one at a time, but if you jump it to let's say 76, you can definitely see that jump there. You can also do negative. So in this case, negative 76 puts it closer to the center for me. So that's each calibrated for these X and Y axis separately. Once you've gotten your dead zone calibrated to the way you'd like it, you can choose Save to save this joystick calibration. We'll just call this Test 2. And then of course, you can load your saved calibrations to this window as well. But once you've saved it and you click Accept, it will ask you if you would like to set it as a default. And just choose Yes. Now every time you load this controller, it will load that calibration for you automatically. And you can see these calibrations in the options window, as long with the path of the calibration here. And you can delete it if you decide you don't want this calibration anymore. And that will allow you to set a new one. Now for your Wii remotes, the joysticks are calibrated the same way by clicking and choosing calibrate, and it brings up that same exact joystick calibration as it will for all joysticks, but your triggers can be calibrated using this, and it brings up a little different window where the top is again your raw and this green is your emulated, and then you have these parts which show the minimum and the maximum that you need to reach for your controller. So you can see here these triggers are set to black, which means that they're being pressed right now, which they definitely are not. So let's calibrate those. So as you can see, as I press my trigger down, it moves both the red and the green at the same rate. And I can never reach quite 100% because the way my controller is outputting. I can get, if I squeeze really hard, I can get almost there, but not quite. And when I'm not pressing it at all, it's setting over 0. So and I definitely don't want that. So by increasing the minimum, this little orange tick will change. And so if I press my controller and move it, you can see that the green doesn't move until I get past that. Now that solves the problem of it being pressed without us actually pressing it, but not getting to 100%. So if I decrease the maximum, I move the black line, and once I surpass the black line, it gets to 100% or more. And there's kind of a visual bug there, but that's not really a big deal. It won't affect your gameplay. So again, I can save this calibration, I can accept it, and I can use it as a default as well, so that it appears in my options list. And as you can see, it stops being black, and now when I press it, it will go to black. The IR calibrations aren't quite done yet, but they are available to be calibrated. The idea for this will be another sort of bounding box thing. I haven't quite fleshed out everything yet, but you have this bounding box that you can change the position of. So that's what this gray area represents, is the actual position. So if you increase this number, it goes down because 0 starts at the top here. So it goes 0 in the Y, 0 in the X, and such. And then of course you can change the width and the height of it. Once again, like I mentioned earlier in this video, this range is based on a 0 to 1023 values. So I can get a larger width or a larger height. Again, you're setting the dead zone here. So while you're when you're pointing at the screen, while it's inside this invisible box, it will output to 0, 0. Right now I don't have my IR set, nor do I have an IR sensor bar set up right now, so I can't really show what exactly is going to be emulated here. But I do have some ideas for other properties, such as like the off-screen behavior and reducing the jitter, which is, when you're holding the Wii remote and your hand's shaking or whatever, you will be moving the mouse, or if you have it set to absolute mouse mode. And in order to reduce that, to make it smooth, that's what the idea behind jitter reduction is. And in order to, you can change the sensitivity level, which is the same thing as if you were to do it in your Wii settings, and you can choose the sensor mode. Also, in the quick assignments for the IR sensor only, we have the absolute position. So when you point to the top right of the screen, your mouse will be in that top right portion of the screen. So this is good for games like Civilization or any point-and-click adventures. One more thing is that the Joy-Cons actually their joysticks don't get calibrated because, like I showed before, the joysticks to Windows look like D-pads instead. And so there's no way to calibrate a D-pad because it just is what it is. It's absolute positioning, so there's no calibrations for those joysticks or yeah, for those joysticks, at least at the moment. Also, coming back to the Wiimote, there isn't any calibrations for the accelerometers yet because I haven't implemented those in WiinUPro yet. I definitely want to make sure that the accelerometer motion control experience is really good, and that is going to take some planning. And there's other features I've just been hammering through because I know that the accelerometers is going to take a lot of time to actually get right and feel good and not just kind of choppy, kind of like how they feel in WiinUSoft right now. So that concludes this video of calibrations. Again, if you have any questions or issues, please use the form to either find an answer or post a new answer if you don't find it. Thank you.